Welcome back to History Olds, because the news isn't new anymore. Today we're going to be talking about historical events between 1956 and 1961. We're going to first talk about space.
The creation of NASA. The Soviet Union's launch of Sputnik in October of 1957 shocked the United States and led the Congress to begin planning for a stronger space program. In February 1958, the President's Scientific Advisory Committee recommended creating a new civilian space agency based on the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics. In the 2nd of April 1958, President Dwight D. Eisenhower asked Congress to establish a civilian agency to oversee the U.S. Space program. The Congress drafted debated legislation and after passing bills on both the House and Senate, approved the National Aeronautics and Space Act of 1958. Eisenhower signed it into law on the 29th of July 1958, creating NASA. NASA was established to see America's non-military space activities and officially began operations in October 1st, 1958. Avro Arrow cancellation. The Avro Arrow was a project by the Royal Canadian Air Force to create one of the most technologically advanced aircraft and jets that existed at that time. In 1957, John Diefenbaker became the Prime Minister of Canada. He quickly found out that the cost of the project was quickly becoming too expensive for the Canadian economy to keep up. He also noticed that the Soviet Union shifted their focus away from jets and turned it towards other weapons, such as the intercontinental ballistic missile. On the 20th of February 1959, John Diefenbaker cancelled the project entirely, even to the point of destroying prototypes, tools, and blueprints. This led to the loss of 14,000 jobs, most of which had later joined NASA. This essentially destroyed Canada's independent military aircraft industry and the possibility of Canada succeeding in the space race.
First human in space. On the 12th of April 1961, Yuri Gagarin, a cosmonaut from the Soviet Union, flew to space in his Vostok 1 spacecraft. He orbited the Earth once with the speed of 27,400 kilometers per hour in 108 minutes. The re-entry of Vostok 1 was controlled by a computer, so instead of landing in a capsule, he ejected himself out of the spacecraft and used a parachute to land safely. The US, after seeing the Soviets' accomplishments, officially congratulated them for Gagarin's 108 minutes flight in space. However, unofficially, they felt the pressure to be a match to them, and after 5 days, they planned a back invasion of communist Cuba, which then failed.
Start of space race. As technology advanced during the Cold War, both the USA and the Soviet Union developed the intercontinental ballistic missiles. As rocket warfare started to look more promising as the future of warfare, the arms race quickly turned into a race of making the more superior technology that can be used to go to space. In other words, it was the birth of the space race. At the start, there were no clear rules. Both countries rushed to get as many accomplishments as possible, such as the launch of Sputnik 1, the first ever man-made object into space. On the 25th of May, 1961, President John F. Kennedy would declare that the space race would only conclude once either side were to land a human on the moon and return safely to Earth. This marks the start of the space race.
And now we're doing politics.
The New Democrat Party, NDP, was formed in 1961 when the Socialist Cooperative Commonwealth Federation combined with unions from the Canadian Labour Congress. The NDP's founding leader was the ex-premier of Saskatchewan, Tommy Douglas, who had created free health care as a premier. Tommy Douglas did not do much while he was in power of the NDP, but he influenced the government to create Medicare and the Canadian Pension Plan, the CPP. Today, the New Democrat Party is a major player in the Canadian government.
In 1956, a parliamentary committee recommended that the First Nation people should be allowed to vote without losing their Indian status. In 1958, Prime Minister John Diefenbaker's government introduced legislation to make this change. In 1960, the federal government passed a law giving status First Nation men and women the right to vote in federal elections without having to give up their status. This ended a long-standing requirement that forced First Nations people to choose between keeping their status and gaining the right to vote. In 1961, First Nations people voted in a federal election for the very first time without losing their status, marking an important step towards greater political equality in Canada.
Quiet Revolution. The Quiet Revolution was meant to let Francophones take control of Quebec. In 1960, recently elected Jean Lesage made big changes to society. He lowered the voting age to 18, changed the control of schools from the church to the government, and supported hydroelectricity for Quebec, with the government now owning Hydro-Quebec and making it run by Francophones. Lesage's plan was to give the province back to the people.
Approval of the Canadian Bill of Rights. The Canadian Bill of Rights is a list of laws that are made to protect human rights and fundamental freedoms, including freedom of speech and equality. This was created in 1960 by Prime Minister John Diefenbaker and his government. The bill was created to ensure that Canadians' basic rights were recognized and protected by the federal government. After being introduced by the PM, John Diefenbaker, at the Parliament on July 1st, 1960, it was passed by the House of Commons and received royal assent from Queen Elizabeth II on August 10, 1960, officially becoming law.
The Berlin Crisis. The Berlin Crisis of 1958 to 1961 was when the Soviet Union threatened the control of Berlin using the communist-controlled East Berlin. The Soviets had proposed an agreement with the US trying to remove them from West Berlin and take up arms if the US declined. Both Britain and the US refused to agree to any demands made by the Soviets, so when the Soviets could not gain West Berlin, they built a wall. On the night of the 12th August 1961, the East German government and the Soviet Union began to build a barrier between East Berlin and West Berlin, making the agreement void. The US did not stop them because they made the wall on the communist land.
The Antarctic Treaty. On the 1st of December 1959, 12 countries, including Argentina, Australia, Belgium, Chile, the French Republic, Japan, New Zealand, Norway, the Union of South Africa, Soviet Union, the UK, and USA, signed the Antarctic Treaty. The treaty essentially demilitarized Antarctica, including the testing of nuclear weapons, fortifications, and establishments of military bases. It made sure that Antarctica was peaceful and was only used for scientific purposes that could be freely used by different nations. This treaty was significant as the very first arms control agreement of the Cold War.
And now the miscellaneous stuff.
The beginning and lasting impact of rock and roll. On the 23rd of March, 1956, Elvis Presley, the album, was released. starting a new trend of music and culture. Although Elvis wasn't the creator of rock and roll, he still pushed the genre to the mainstream and inspired countless other artists, including the Beatles. Elvis's impact spread across countries and made rock and roll a worldwide genre. The impact of rock changed cultures and introduced new music genres, acting like the catalyst of modern-day culture.
On December 31st, 1960, CFTO, now known as CTV News, made its debut on air, providing Toronto viewers with a new source of for television programming. The founder, John W.H. Bassett, made CFTO build with the technology to broadcast in color, despite Canada not officially licensing the broadcast of color television at that time. This has proved to be the right decision, as on the 31st of December 1960, CFTO was the first ever station to broadcast in color in Canada. Today, CTV News has become one of the most watched and trusted news organizations, providing accurate information for millions across Canada. Hockey Hall of Fame opening. The Hockey Hall of Fame was officially opened on August 26, 1961. At the opening, Prime Minister John Diefenbaker and the U.S. Ambassador Livingston T. Merchant endorsed the Hall of Fame. The Hockey Hall of Fame had the most visits during the annual 20-day run of the CNE, but was unable to charge admission during that period. Visitors during the remainder of the year didn't cover the cost of operating the business, so during the 90s, the Hall of Fame was moved to its current location at BCE Place.
Creation of the microchip. In 1958, Jack Kilby was experimenting with ways of miniaturizing electrical components and successfully created the very first working integrated circuit using a piece of germanium. This invention fundamentally squished many electrical components into a single chip, making computers much smaller and more power efficient. Later, in 1959, Robert Noyce recognized that using silicon would be more beneficial for mass production, as it would be more abundant and had superior electrical capabilities compared to germanium, and created the very first practical silicon microchip. These advancements in computer technology played a major role in creating modern computers around the globe.
New live virus polio vaccine. Polio is a highly infectious disease that attacks the nervous system and could lead to spinal and respiratory paralysis, or in the worst case, death. Polio was known to be the most feared disease before it had a vaccine. In the mid-1950s, people didn't have to worry about it as much anymore because Dr. Jones E. Salk developed a vaccine for it called inactivated polio vaccine, also known as IPV, which helped a lot of people from surviving polio. And in 1961, a second polio vaccine was developed by physician Albert Sabin. His vaccine was made to be significantly more effective than Salk's IPV. Albert Sabin had developed a live virus vaccine called oral polio vaccine, also known as the OPV, which stopped the virus from replicating itself and spreading from person to person. St. Lawrence Seaway officially opens. The St. Lawrence Seaway is a system of canals, locks, and waterways that connects the Atlantic Ocean to the Great Lakes. Opened in 1959, it allows large ships to travel deep into North America and reach ports in both Canada and the United States. The Seaway was built as a joint project between Canada and the United States. It made it possible for ocean-going vessels to transport goods directly between inland cities and international markets, reducing transportation costs and improving trade. The St. Lawrence Seaway is important because it transformed shipping and commerce in North America. By connecting the Great Lakes region to the world, it helps strengthen the economies of both countries and remains a major transportation route today.